Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about unsolicited advice. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, do you offer unsolicited advice or opinions to engineers in other teams if you feel there is an area for improvement in their implementation or process? Yes, in some cases, but only when there is an organic overlap in the things that we are doing. And I only do it by playing the fool. So let me explain that a little bit. So there is this thing that we people have, most people have, which is an ego. And depending on the ego and how sensitive it is, it's very difficult for you to provide, even if you're trying to be helpful, constructive feedback or suggestions to some people, because they will automatically take that as an attack on their ego, or that sort of it's like you're breaking the illusion they have, my friend, about that they're perfect. And most people want to just sort of, without really knowing it, but it's more important to sort of not be told that you're not perfect than anything else. When you do that, a lot of people get very sensitive. And so I've always found that when you provide advice to anybody where this is an option or that this is a likely thing, it's just usually, I find it to be very effective to just play an idiot. Or just be an idiot every single time. It works really well. When I mean being an idiot, it basically means that you never suggest to someone, do this thing because it's better. Like, you never go overt like that. You always basically just try to go from the perspective of, can you please help me understand this thing because I'm not as smart as you? And then you have them explain in their own words what they're doing, and then you just probe a few times and like, why are you doing that? I'm just I like you cannot sound questioning in any way. This is the balancing act. You can't make them feel stupid by asking it. Yeah, it's like you because it's you have to learn this dance. It's basically because it is basically a dance or a song or something like that. You have to play this instrument very, very finely, and then if you do everything correctly, you might be able to say, "Oh, cool! So you're doing it this way." I would have thought that this would be an alternative to do this thing, because what you basically are trying to do is to get them to explain as much as possible, to get them into that mind space where they're reflecting on the thing that they did, and then in the most graceful possible way. So it's sort of like the light bulb thing. Like you play the idiot, so people think that you truly are like really, really stupid, and that you don't really know the answer. And then it's like you just thought of it after their amazing explanation of what they did. You thought, wow, yeah, you're really smart. But you know what? I just had this idea. It could also work if you did this, maybe. And if you did it all right, they're gonna feel as if, yeah, actually that's not a bad suggestion, because they're like, they have been like, their ego has been soothed, they have been acknowledged as the genius, and this stupid person who is sort of just trying to learn because you are clearly the superior person in this conversation has this gets inspired by the magic that is your talent and then had like a suggestion that could it's sort of like how a child or something like that comes and plays around with, I don't know, gives advice to their parents or something like that. Well, oh, it's sort of cute that you came up with this idea. But actually, even though they're not as smart as I am, actually, you know what? Now it's almost like you make them believe it themselves. Like, oh, this would be a great idea. If you do all of that right, yeah, do it. Go for it. But otherwise, I find it to be, especially when it's inter-team type of things, I always found that, and I suspect that this is why we have this, which is the genius of contracts. Contracts are a very good thing. And this is why I always tell people, when you are taking the time to establish a process. Don't be so fucking lazy that you just have a gentleman's agreement about how things should work. The things that you truly depend on, write it down. Set clear expectations. Because when there is ambiguity, which is almost always the case between two groups who don't really fraternize all that much, when they don't, like, they're not working together, and like they don't create this it's almost like a sort of connection, right? When you work in a group of people that you see all the time, you talk to them every day, the alignment sort of happens organically in many cases, because you're all the subtle communication, you're all in the same meetings, and you have expressed yourself in the group, you sort of automatically align. But when that's not happening, when you're isolated from each other and you never really talk, then the contract becomes very important, because if you don't have that and people don't know what the expectations are from each group when you're interacting or doing things together, it becomes very easy for you to mistake somebody's maybe very benign intentions as criticism, or it causes friction, or so forth and so forth. And so by having very clearly stated rules about what the expectations on deliverables or things like that are between the teams, or sort of how we do things, you can always make a suggestion. And if you get pushback, or there's someone who sort of takes that as a personal thing, or like they're not really fulfilling their contract or something like that, if they attack you, you can very easily say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I understand. I completely understand you. It's just that we have this thing that we decided, so we should probably try to follow the rules." It's a law, it's a contract, it's the same sort of deal, right? You have something to sort of take the pressure off you as an individual, because it's not me who's being an asshole to you, it's just me pointing out that there are these rules that we have all agreed on that we should probably follow. That's good. And then if they choose to break it, it's actually it's almost a primal thing. They will realize that now they have done wrong because they are not following the rules, and that's bad, because you should be following the rules, because otherwise there are going to be consequences, etc., 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 right? And on the other part, if somebody does have this sort of egoistic or egomaniacal or so forth way of being, where they don't really give a shit about anything or anybody, so forth and so forth, because they're sort of like, it's my way or the highway. If you have this contract, it becomes very easy for you to go and get very concrete proof to a manager or someone else who can address the situation, because some people don't respond to agreements, some people only respond to power or threat or like fear, things like that. So what I want you to take away from this is that I do sometimes give unsolicited opinions to people, usually when I feel that it's very necessary, but only when it's organic, only when maybe I do a code review for some other team, or there's some process issue, or something isn't really working, etc., etc., and I always play the fool, almost always. I think even I'm not sure now, I'm not a philosopher, I think this was the way that Socrates would argue. I've read that somewhere, where he would play stupid in every conversation when he was talking to a fellow philosopher, or like a person he had a conversation with, and he would bait the person in talking as much as possible, trying to and just sort of waiting until they had presented all of their information, and then sort of immediately repost back and say, well, this is true, the things that you have said are true, but you haven't considered all of these sorts of things, which took people aback a little bit, because they get lulled into this idea that they're talking to a stupid person or someone who is beneath them, and so their ego takes over. You mean because that's sort of how it works, right? The more you talk, the more likely you are to say something that isn't really good. And in today's world, you might have seen the trend: if you say the wrong thing, people forget all the other stuff that was amazing about what you said, and just focus on that thing that you said that wasn't really PC or something like that, which is exactly how you can use that as a weapon. But I usually use it as a way to make people feel comfortable with the following my real agenda, which is to make a suggestion. But in order for you to get there, you have to build up that, you have to soothe the ego, you have to make people feel like they get them into a headspace where they are open to a second opinion. Some people get there, like they are very humble immediately, so you don't have to do this, you can just immediately get into it. But some people are like that. You simply have to convince them that they are the smartest person in the room, and when they feel like they are the smartest person in the room, you pretend being the idiot who was inspired by their genius and had a addition to make, and then they're usually more receptive of your suggestions. But if at all possible, create contracts between teams and different groups that just agree on a set of principles or a set of rules, and write them down ideally, of how you do things, etc., etc. Because it's always better to have, when you come into that situation where there's a conflict brewing or there's tension brewing or something like that, instead of making it like a battle between two people, make it a discussion about that document that you wrote. It's sort of the same thing with laws. If you make the law, you can always refer to the law rather than saying that I feel that you did wrong. Oh yeah, but I don't agree with you, etc., etc. Then the battle happens between the people rather than it being a discussion of interpreting the rules in the correct way, which mitigates a lot of that frustration a lot of people can get when they talk to groups they don't really know all that well. Have a great day.